So the topic that we chose tonight is I want to give a brief introduction to it, which is just that when I wanted to study Bible in the department, or Tanakh, can I say Tanakh in this crowd?
Yeah, use all the Hebrew.
All the Hebrew too.
Moses.
Okay, good. That makes me feel, as an Israeli, that makes my life easier. So when I wanted to study Tanakh in university, when I finished my 2 years of national service, my father basically said, study anything you want in Bar Ilan or in any university, but not Tanakh. And I remember that every single day of I think by now I could say career, but of my life. And the reason that was so substantial to me was because, and also a very important turning point, was because I was brought up in a house where Torah learning was very, very centered. And my father is an educator. I mean, now he's retired, but he was an educator, and he spent a lot of his life studying and learning Gemara, but also Tanakh. And I thought this basically was the biggest compliment he could get, meaning that I actually want to devote my professional life into doing something that I thought was extremely substantial. We're not from a Syrian family, we're from a Yekish family. So it was like kind of given that you go to university. So I thought here, I'm getting best of both worlds. I'm also going to go to the university, and I'm also going to make this, what my father, or what I was raised is to be the essence of our life, to be my profession. And actually my father's reaction turned out to be a long conversation that I feel I still continue, not with him anymore, but with myself, with my children, with my students. He's come to peace many years ago with what I've chosen to do. But what it made me was always be cautious and always wonder about my decision, and always be very aware of the benefits, but also of the prices that may be paid, that caused him to react in such a clear way, saying, go study law, go study computers, why study Tanakh? And I said, what do you mean? This is the essence of our life, and you're telling me not to spend most of my life doing it? So what I want to bring today to the table is some of that conversation in a roundabout way, which is what, on the one hand, makes the university setting or what the opportunities the university setting brings up, on one hand, which I think are extremely important and contribute and enable us to deepen our Tanakh studying, but on the other hand, also keeping in mind why it was my father who told me study anything you want without it. But I'm using here my father as a symbol for a general atmosphere that really has a lot to say about maybe stepping back and not trying to learn in depth from the academic world. So when we discussed the title of this shiur, can you remind me the title now? I don't have the source sheet in front of me. It's coming up. The first one, it's coming up from the Mem Reconciling.
I did. Can Divinity of Torah and Bible scholarship be reconciled?
Right. So could Divinity of Torah and Bible scholarship be reconciled? So I think that's exactly the Bible scholarship part is where I want to actually start. And let's start at the first part of this title. The first part of this title is the Divinity of Torah. We each have at the end of our Siddur the Ikarim of the Rambam, and one of the Ikarim, and it's not really the Ikar as it is in the Rambam, but it's like a short, abridged version, at least in my Rinat Israel Siddur. I don't even know who. There's no. It doesn't say who made this version of the Shlosh Esrei Ikarim, but it definitely says that Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the whole Torah, and as we have it today. That being a fundamental assumption that I finish my davening with every morning is very different from what we ask when we do academic studying, where I think the main difference is what fundamental assumptions you come into the room with. When you're an observant Jew who dappens every morning, the first thing you say is, this is what I believe in. It's not something that can be dismissed in any way. It's subjective. It's what I believe in. Other people can believe in different things. When we come to a university setting or when we come to scholarly work, then the first thing someone asks or looks at is, I'm not going to assume anything. I'm not going to come with anything as a given. There's no fundamental assumptions. I will now be able to check every fundamental assumption, judge it with my own eyes, check what will be the outcome according to what I will observe or see or what will be my experiences, and that's what will judge the outcome. So the first clash comes with our fundamental assumptions. Do we walk into a room assuming that there's something I believe in that's prior to anything I may come up or I may understand when I look at the text? Or do I come into a room assuming that now all questions can be asked and all answers will be respected if that's what my academic or my objective so-called experience or my when I check all the evidence I have in front of me, which whatever they may be with regarding to any verse it may be. Yes, briefly just. I'm going to answer your question briefly, just because we're waiting also for the other source sheets. But then I'll devote time for questions at the end. Okay? Okay, your statement. Just your name, please.
Mars.
Mars. Yes.
The Bible critics have their own suppositions, also walking in and saying that what they're saying.
That's why I said so-called. That was exactly why I used the word so-called, because I think today in 2019 we know that there's no kind of situation where any of us are objective. But it's just, I think the difference is whether we come and announce our prepositions when we walk into a room, or do we consider ourselves to be objective and say that we're open to any conclusions. So I agree with you, and that is exactly why I was, saying, framing it that way. I will say one other thing is that the source sheets that we have in front of us are basically what I wanted to start with or point out was that none of our questions are new, meaning the things that come up to us today as sometimes feel to us may be a little awkward or feel to us something we want to ask about, something that biblical critics or people who look at the sources in different ways. Sarah?
Yeah, now we gotta change the whole direction of the class.
We'll be fine. אני צריכה את הכותרת. לא, אני צריכה את הדף עם הכותרת, שאני אתייחס אליה. So, I started saying that the questions that come across our mind today, or that sometimes challenge us today, are not new for us and have always, I would say, have been around ever since Torah Shebe'al Peh came about. And I will start with one of the sources in בסדר, but I need everyone to have it. Does everyone have it? Did she pass it around?
Everyone has the first one.
Right. No. So, and when are we?
The second one is this one.
נכון, I'm asking if everyone's passing it around.
Everyone has that one. No.
That's the second one.
That's the second. אני שואלת מתי יהיה לכולם את הראשון.
Which is the one I brought? The one I brought, everyone else.
זה יש לכולם? זה מה שאני מתכוונה.
It's the same thing? The same thing. If you look at them, they're the same.
I want to start, רגע, אין את זה לכולם או יש לכולם?
Yes, everyone has. It's all the
This
same.
one.
First one.
Can the Divinity of Torah?
Yeah, he's getting it now.
Okay.
No, that one's different. That one.
No, we are going to start with the source sheet that I think you don't have yet in front of you. That's called Can the Divinity of Torah?
No, it's different.
And the first source is the Rambam.
No. No.
Okay. I'll tell you a secret. Jesse and I were working out the title on different source sheets, and then he copied pasted the right title on the different set of source sheets. So that's why it was hard for us to understand which sheets we had in front of us. That's what happened. I apologize. Do you need it? You want it?
Can't wait.
No, I have. Yalla. So, but chabal on our time, so let's, does everyone, אבל יש מספיק לכולם? Okay, so now everyone has a source sheet in front of them that has the Rambam that I quoted before. We're good. You should have a source sheet that, you should all have a source sheet that starts with the Rambam. Here's another copy. So, okay, now we have, everyone has a source sheet that starts with the Rambam, which I discussed before, so now I want to go to the second source here. The second, so I think the most prominent rabbi that actually was aware of these questions when they came up, when he lived in the 19th century, was Rav Kook, who lived from 1865 to 1935, which I'm noting because it's the exact years that the ancient Near Eastern evidence started to become extremely popular. And it was first known that we find texts that are that can be compared to the biblical sources, and that started becoming very famous. And this is already 100 years later, after the first biblical critics started to opposing some of the fundamental assumptions that believers, Jews, Christian believers all around the world had with regarding to the Tanakh. And this was like a second step. The second step was also finding all these ancient Near Eastern diggings, teudot, information, cuneiforms discovered out of the ground, evidence. And now we'll see how Rav Kook addresses it. I will just note for anyone who might not be familiar that he was the first chief Ashkenazi rabbi in Israel, and that this book that I'm quoting is called Lenevuchei Hador, is one of the first books Rav Kook wrote when he was actually younger. And it's called Lenevuchei Hador because it was like his trying to build on Moreh Nevuchim, like the second level of Moreh Nevuchim for his generation. He wasn't the only one who wrote, a prominent rabbi who wrote like a new Moreh Nevuchim for his generation. But this book, Lenevuchei Hador, is in front of you. Jesse, Hebrew and English. The sources should be read in both languages? Okay. I'll do it briefly. רוב המבוכות באות לעולם רק מפני האנשים שהם מסתפקים בדעות קצובות ומוגבלות ואינם חפצים להטריח את כוח המחשבה שלהם לשוטט בכל המרחב של הרעיון בטבעו הטהור. Most of the confusion comes to the world because of people who happily settle for limited views and are not interested in challenging themselves by letting their minds wander and broadening their scope of thought. So, first of all, you see Rav Kook is saying very, very clearly, people should not be afraid to think, people should not be afraid to limit their thoughts. Limiting your thoughts is something that makes confusion, and broadening your horizons, being willing to fully think and not put your brain in the freezer, but really think things out is the way to deal with them. He goes on to say, על כן כשהם מחדשים, או נדמה להם שהם מחדשים איזה מחשבה, אינם יכולים להסכימה כלל עם יסוד דבריהם הנכונים לאומה. When people are afraid to think, then they're also afraid to think of new things or to think of things that could be new, and they think that they might contradict some things that are obvious within our nation. And those people that are afraid to think, והם טוענים אחר כך בהכרח של קריאת האומה למפלגות. And then they think that if they think something new, that might be harmful for the nation. But what's the truth? בשעה שאנו רואים שהשלמת כל דבר הוא באחדותו. But really, if we want to have something whole, something that's completed, something that really brings in all the different parts of the nation, then it can bring all the different parts of the thoughts of the nation, and it can also bring people who think differently or think things that might have been new together. So what we see here is, first of all, Rav Kook, who was aware of the confusion that some of the evidence or the texts brought, this is a part of a much longer quote. For time limitations, I just brought these few sentences here to note specifically that he goes on saying you should not be afraid of thinking, of asking questions, or of addressing them. More specifically, I want to bring now the next source, which is Rav Hoffman, the Radatz Hoffman. Radatz Hoffman, who is also he lived in Berlin. We're talking again in the more or less a little bit after Rav Kook, but a little bit earlier than Rav Kook, but almost the same years. He lived in 1843 to 1921, and he was the head of the Beit Midrash LeRabbanim in Berlin. He was very unique because he was actually the first prominent rabbi who not only was aware of biblical criticism and what biblical criticists around him were saying, but he was the first rabbi, at least that I know, that in his Perush for the Torah specifically mentions why and how he's contradicted and how he's dealing with approaches that to him have become more popular of some of the biblical critics in his time, and why they're not valid, and why he thinks differently. I want to say that if you're familiar with Rav Hirsch's Perush to the Torah, is that a known Perush? Rav Hirsch lived before Rav Hoffman from 1808, from 1808 to 1888, and he also writes a Perush to the Torah. And since Rav Hirsch too, studied in a German university and also Bible studies, and was aware, just like Rav Hoffman, of these new ideas, they each decided to deal with it totally different. While Rav Hirsch's Perush to the Torah is on the surface, has no mention of any alternative idea, or has no mention of any specific German that had other ideas, whether it's De Wette or Wellhausen or other critics of the Torah. If you are aware and you are familiar with these ideas, and then you go through Rav Hirsch's Perush, you see that he's literally giving an answer, one after another, to these ideas, except he's doing it in a way that's not explicit. He's doing it in an unexplicit way in order to make sure that the Perush is acceptable in all audiences. The person who actually made that more clear was his son-in-law, Guggenheimer, in a correspondence in a Ktav Et called Yeshurun that came out in those years in Germany, where he takes part of Rav Hirsch's Perush for Chumash Bereshit, mostly Sefer Parashat Bereshit and Noach, and there Guggenheimer actually takes Rav Hirsch's Perush to the Torah, takes the biblical critics, and shows that Rav Hirsch gives a reply to their ideas, just not mentioning their names. And I think that's why Rav Hirsch's Perush is much more popular till today among all the different circles. They used to say in Germany that just like there used to be Rashi in the Torah, so for Germans that didn't read Hebrew, there was Rav Hirsch in the Torah because he was written in Germany. So, but Rav Hoffman gained some and lost some. His Perush was much less popular, and it definitely didn't stay popular till today. But for those people who are then going to the German universities and were exposed to German to the biblical criticism of the Germans, they did have a response in his Perush. And let's look at one example here, which I brought to you in source number 3 of this page. הדימויים המעטים שבין תיאור התורה ושאר תיאורי הבריאה מתבארים מתוך ההנחה שהייתה קיימת מסורת עתיקה משותפת לכלל האנושות. So first he's saying, he knows that there's more than one Mabul story, and some exist in ancient Near Eastern stories. And there's Gilgamesh, and it has similarities, but it's different from some of our Sipurim, and so on. And what he's saying is that Dimuim HaMe'atim, the few places that we actually find stories that are similar between our Torah and what we find in ancient Near Eastern texts, V'sh'ar Tiurei HaBri'ah, מתבארים מתוך הנחה, should be understood, on the assumption שהייתה קיימת מסורת עתיקה משותפת לכלל האנושות. You shouldn't be surprised. There was an ancient history that was common for the general universe. And you shouldn't expect to see something that's only in the Torah and doesn't show up anywhere else, because humanity, and now I'm adding my own words, existed for everyone, and everyone had a world they lived in. And therefore, some of these stories will definitely be a parallel to stories that existed for general humanity. מסורת אשר אצל אבות האומה הישראלית נמסרה מדור לדור ביתר דיוק, עד אשר בא הגילוי האלוקי בתורה, והעלה את הדברים על הכתב בניסוח קבוע ובהתאם לעובדות כפי שהתרחשו. So he's saying there was a general notion of history, but then God gave his התגלות, בא הגילוי האלוקי בתורה, and then the things were actually written. And once they were written for us, the Jewish nation, then they were written in a certain aspect. I would compare it to any event that we can take. Let's take the declaration of the State of Israel in 1948. I assume that many people can give some kind of, anyone who lived there can give some kind of write-up on what happened. An American Jew would, American non-Jew would probably write up one thing. A European person would write up something else. And then a Jewish reporter or writer giving the insight from the perspective of the Jewish nation would write up that story in a totally different manner than the way it would be written up anywhere else. And that's even before we talk about the hitgalut elokit, meaning we understand that it could be that the same story will be written up in different ways. That doesn't mean that one writer wrote it and the other one isn't valid or the other one is less true. It means that there are different perspectives to one event, which is basically what that's Hoffman's saying, but he's saying something more substantial. He's saying when all these events were told to Am Yisrael through God, then they were also given the Gilui Eloki B'Torah. Then they're not just another point of view given like many others could be given. They're really God speaking to the Jewish nation of how to read the history that happened until they existed. So I would say that that's the first set of questions that usually comes up when we actually discuss the scholarly sources. The first set of questions has to do with, is the Torah unique? In what way is it unique? How do we understand that different nations in the ancient Near East had parallel stories, but different ones? Rav Kook says in another source that I didn't bring here, which I think also fills here the picture, that because the whole Bri'ah is God's, then we shouldn't expect that prior to the starting of Am Yisrael, there was nothing musari in the world. There was nothing that was musari, ethical. Thank you. Ethical in the world. Of course, God had ethics in the world before Am Yisrael, and of course, different ethics came about in different ways. It's only that when Am Yisrael, Hashem did His brit with Am Yisrael, then some of these things were fine-tuned to match Am Yisrael. And therefore, again, we shouldn't be surprised when we see Bri'ah stories in other nations, or some of the laws that we see in the Torah parallel in other nations, or some of the things that the traditions that we have prior to the Torah. We shouldn't misunderstand thinking that this was a totally new creation that God made for Am Yisrael. No. God created the world and it had all these elements in it. But when Am Yisrael came to be, it was made, fine-tuned, justified, adjusted, would use whatever word you want. So the Brit ben HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael had its essence and was actually brought out of what was already beforehand God's world. That's on one level. That's, I would say, one very important level that has to do with the scholarly notion of studying Tanakh. And what I think it actually refines is that if we look at Rav Kook saying, if we look at Radatz Hoffman saying, if we look at also what Rav Hirsch puts in his Pirush, none of them ever object to understanding what's out there, to learning from the cuneiform texts, from learning from other evidence. And none of them also assume that what's found in the Torah has to be so unique that there can be no parallels out of the Torah. We just have to learn from the uniqueness of what we find as far as the Brit with Am Yisrael. The second part has to do with another level of scholarly work. A lot of the scholarly work is devoted to really trying to say, what exactly does this text mean? In scholarly words, I would call it bikoret nemucha, lower criticism. Whereas what we dealt with until now was higher criticism, or bikoret gvuha. And when we look at the lower criticism, a lot of what's usually asked is, were these words written this way? Did these words always mean this, what we think they mean? How could it be that there's, in this room, I should say, Keter Aram Tzova, which is one version, but if we look at other Kitvei Yad that came about, some of them are less meduyakim than Keter Aram Tzova, but Kehilot used them and learned from them and assumed that they were the most fine-tuned text that we could work with. And these questions, too, are more popular today because we have much more knowledge accessible to us. It's more than any time before that we can go to a Hebrew reading room library and look at all the microfilms and look at all the texts. But really, it's not a new question. And here I would look first, now you can go back to your other set of sheets and look at source 9. Okay? At the last side, the Midrash Tanchuma Parashat B'Shalach. And the Medrash here says something very clearly, but we don't always really fully stop and think about what it means. Ki hanogea bachem hanogea bebavat eino. You have it? Eini haya lo lomar. Meaning the pasuk should have said in Zechariah, not ki hanogea bachem nogea bebavat eino. The pasuk should have said, Ki hanogea bachem nogea bebavat eini, because he's talking about God discussing himself. Ela shekinao katuv, klomar, kivyachol klapei ma'alan. What does the verse want to say? That kinao katuv. He wanted to say it's not. He didn't want to say. I'm not going to go into the interpretation of the pasuk in Ezra because of our time limitations. But I want to point out that the Medrash assumes that the pasuk should have said bavat eini, but for educational reasons he changed it to bavat eino, to be third person, not first person. V'kinao katuv shu tikun sofrim Anshe Knesset Hagdola, meaning that the Great Assembly, Anshe Knesset Hagdola, corrected the pasuk, and it wasn't the only pasuk that they corrected for an educational reason. Here we go on. Kayatzebo ve'amartem minei matla'a ve'fachtem oti. Also, it's like a bad smell that comes out of, supposedly, to God. So it's not oto, it's oti. Ve'chayotzebo ve'Avraham odenu omed lifnei Hashem. That it shouldn't be, that it should really, what happened in the story was that Hashem was omed lifnei Avraham, but again we have a tikkun sofrim, ve'Avraham odenu omed lifnei Hashem, ela shekinao kotuv kayotze bo, ve'im kacha im atosali. So we can go on and see that these are all verses, that what does the pasuk wants to say? They wants to say, the line before the last, ela shekinu psukim elu anshe knesset hagdola. ולכן נקראו סופרים, שהיו סופרים כל אותיות שבתורה ודורשים אותן, and here's another תיקון סופרים. So, what do we actually see in this pasuk? We see that the idea, the concept, I don't know when, where, and how, but the concept that there was a pasuk written by God in a certain way. And in our case, Anshe Knesset Gdola found that for educational reasons it should be changed, is listed already in the Midrash. And not only is it listed in that Midrash, we'll go back to hold down both pages, please, to the fourth Makor. Then you'll see, Lefi Shechavivin, here's the Midrash Shmot Rabbah, so you'll see it's popular. Lefi Shechavivin Israel kebavat ha'ain ha'elyona, and here again the pasuk mentions again the same pasuk in Zechariah. כי הנוגע בכם נוגע בבבת עינו, אלו הסופרים והחכמים שתקנו הסייג הזה. And I could have brought more quotes. I just want to say that when we look at the idea that something about this text in some kind of generations that were later than Moshe Rabbeinu was changed, in this case maybe for educational reasons, already exists in Chazal, exists in the Midrash, is quoted later by commentators. These Midrashim are quoted later by commentators to the Torah on these different verses, meaning it's not this Midrash Izoteri she'af echad lo zocher oto, because if you go look at your source 5, you'll see that Rashi explicitly quotes again the Midrash, and he says specifically, אלא תיקון סופרים הוא זה, שהפכו רבותינו לכתוב כן. Now, I'm not in a laboratory, so I don't know what Rashi thought. Meaning, I don't know if he thought that till Anshe Knesset Gdola, all the texts were different and then they were changed. I don't know if he thinks that this was written originally like this, but it's רק מיוחס לאנשי כנסת הגדולה. I באמת don't have an answer. But I just want to point out that Chazal lo hisesu lomar, they weren't hesitant to say that something here for a certain reason, in this case it's for respect of God, was reframed, and not only was it that case, it was that case 89 times. And not only 89 times, the commentators like Rashi go on quoting this every time they reach any of these psukim. I'll give another example for the same idea, but in a different way. Now let's look at Radak. Radak says, in source number 6, in his Hakdamat for Yehoshua, why do we have Kri and Ktiv? What's the agenda behind Kri and Ktiv? What are we supposed to do? Why are we holding on to also the Kri and also the Ktiv? And look what Radak says, and just to say, we're in the 12th century, we're in the 12th century. וגם אכתוב טעם וקרי וכתיב, טעם כתוב וקרי, וכתיב ולא קרי, וקרי ולא כתיב. Why do I, says Radak, I'm going to give you in my commentary for the Torah an explanation for all the Kri and all the Ktiv. I'm not going to explain each pasuk only by the Kri or only by the Ktiv. Everyone knows here what's Kri and Ktiv, right? I will explain every time both options. Why? And this is what he says. כאשר אוכל לתת טעם לשניהם כל אחד במקומו. I'll do my best. ונראה כי המילות האלו נמצאו כן, לפי שבגלות הראשונה עבדו הספרים ונטלטלו. Why do we have Kri and Ktiv? What's the reason? After the first temple was destroyed, 586 BCE, we're talking many years before, almost 2,000 years before he wrote the Perush, some of the books were lost. והחכמים יודעי המקרא מתו, ואנשי כנסת הגדולה החזירו התורה לישנה, ומצאו מחלוקת בספרים והלכו בהם אחר הרוב לפי דעתם. So why do we have Kri and Ktiv? Because we did have a certain point in history where some of the books or some of the traditions were lost. And since just like we have today, Keter Tova, and we have other texts of the Torah that came to us, saved from different diaspora places, Also here, when they came back, the texts were brought back from different diasporas, and sometimes there were conflicts or there were contradictions, and Radak says Chazal didn't know what to do. So what did they do? Every time the truth was obvious to them, they knew if the word should be like this or like this because it was obvious. Then they wrote in what was obvious. But sometimes they just weren't sure. And both options made sense. And this is what he writes. ובמקום שלא השיגה דעתם על הבירור, כתבו האחד ולא נקדו, או כתבו מבחוץ ולא כתבו מבפנים, וכן כתבו בדרך אחד מבפנים ובדרך אחד מבחוץ. But in all the places they weren't sure, what they decided was to put both traditions on the table. So what's Radak telling us? Radak's telling us, because Chazal thought that both of these options are valid, I am going to give a pirush to both options because I myself respect the fact that they thought that they were both serious options, and if Chazal didn't want to say which one of them is right, and they held on to both of them, when I give my pirush to the Torah, I definitely should respect both options, and I should give pirushim to both of them. Look at the Meiri, the verse 10, the source 10 on your other source sheet again, and you'll see again that it's not only Radak. Here Meiri also Rishon writes, "וסיבת המחלוקת הנמצאים בין הספרים הוא אומנם מה שהתחלנו לבאר." Why do we have מחלוקת between the books? And here he okay, let's go on then I'll explain. שבזמן הגלויות הראשונים עבדו הספרים ונטלטלו החכמים והבקיאים במקראות. ספו ותמו ויגיע תור אנשי הכנסת הגדולה, ואימץ השם את לבבם להחזיר התורה לישנה. מצאו מחלוקת בין הספרים והלכו בהם אחר הרוב, וכאשר לא נמצא רוב לדון אחריו, קיימו את שנראה להם לפי דעתם. וכאשר לא השיג היד שכולם כתבו בדרך אחד וכתבו בדרך אחרת, וכתבו הכתוב בפנים והקריא בחוץ, ומקומות שבמקרא הוסיפו. So, you see, it wasn't only Radak. You see, for instance here, that Meiri says very clearly, has the same exact notion, that basically says, what can we do? History has its I would say applications, or it's what we had to deal with, and this is the outcome. The outcome is that we have Kri and Ktiv, and we should respect them both. But what I do want to say is that it's not only like we saw in the first source of the Medrash, and then that Rashi quotes it and other Pirushim quoted, that there might have been changes man-made into the text for respect of God. And it's not only that we hear from Radak and Meiri and others that even Anshe Knesset Gdola had a problem trying to figure out which exactly was the right word to put in the text, which is why we have two options and we give pirushim to both options. The next source I want to look at is the source of Ibn Ezra. And I'll say that also Ibn Ezra here doesn't start only from Ibn Ezra. I'm looking at the watch, so I'm not going to go through both sources, but you could look at source number 5 in the alternative sheet, I'll call it, and you'll see it in the Gemara there. And now we'll continue in our source sheet to source number 7, and you'll see the way Ibn Ezra makes use of the Gemara when he wants to incorporate his pirush to the Torah. And he says very specifically like this. Source number 7, Ibn Ezra, פירוש לדברים, פרק א', פסוק ב'. וכן פירוש ככל אשר ציווה השם אותו עליהם. בעבר הירדן במדבר בערבה. ואם תבין סוד 12, גם ויכתוב משה, והכנעני אז בארץ, בהר השם יראה, והנה ארצו ארץ ברזל, תכיר האמת. So Ibn Ezra says that there's some kind of secret, סוד 12. Whoever wants to read about this, so the Shem Asal more, Professor Simon wrote a lot about it, also in articles and also in a recent book on Ibn Ezra. But it's quoted not only in source 7, also in source 8, where I just wanted to point out that in each of the psukim he mentions it. והכנעני אז בארץ, ייתכן שארץ כנען תפסה מיד אחר כנען, I'll explain this in a minute. ואם איננו כן, יש לו סוד, והמשכיל יידום. and there's a secret, but anyone who's smart should be quiet. So I'll allow myself to say that in 2019 with internet and radio and everything that's so accessible to us off the top of our hands, I'm going to give away the secret, but it's because you can Google Soda Shnei Masar Ibn Ezra and you'll find it out for yourselves. This is not for lack of respect to Ibn Ezra. I will say that two options of what exactly is the secret, why Soda Shnei Masar, but they both have the same meaning. Soda Shnei Masar is either nicknamed for the name 12, the 12 is for the last 12 verses of the Torah, which is option 1, or option 2 is that there are 12 places in the Torah where this is applicable. And what is it? Both options either go through 12 verses around the Torah or the last 12 verses of the Torah. And if you read in Ibn Ezra's introduction to the Torah, I wouldn't be surprised if they're both true, because he uses a lot of tichkum in his pirush. But both options basically want to say that there are a few psukim that Ibn Ezra thinks were written after the days of Moshe, after Moshe passed away. Why the last 12 verses of the Torah? Because Moshe himself already dies. So we could go like Chazal, and some of the commentators like Rashi say that Moshe was writing what happened after he was going to die. He was crying and writing, which is one option. But we can also say that in a world of Bchira Chofshit and in a world where now Yehoshua is going to go on and be the successor of Moshe, it wasn't Moshe who wrote it, but maybe Yehoshua or maybe someone else that added the last 12 verses, and that's what Ibn Ezra thinks. And the other psukim he talks about are, for example, Vaknani as Baaretz is an example referring to, this might not make sense to you now, but then the Canaanites lived in Israel. So if someone adds a verse saying, as then so-and-so happened, that shows kind of a reflection on history that may have been a later addition. Now, not all 12 verses work out excellently, which is why there's a contradiction between the super commentators of Ibn Ezra on what exactly the 12 and the secret of 12 means. But in any case, it is agreed that the secret that he thought shouldn't have been known to the general population was the fact that maybe not all verses were already written before Moshe Rabbeinu died. And here I want to say something with great respect to Ibn Ezra and also to the Rambam, which we opened with one of the Ikarim of the Rambam, which is that they all had an educational notion in mind, meaning they all understood that certain things could be said in certain contexts, and they should not be said in other contexts, which is a notion I respect and I think is true today too. I would not give this shiur here to a 7th grader class, because I think that in different times of our lives, we can be exposed. There's a 6th grader in the room? Okay, I'm not taking any responsibility. 8th, okay. I'm not taking responsibility that you'll talk, who are the parents in the room? This is just to say that there are certain notions of understanding that are acceptable at different stages of our life. Just like when I was talking to Jesse, I wanted the fact that we're going to talk about scholarship be clear to the audience, because whoever wants to be exposed to biblical scholarship and its challenges is more than welcome. But if someone chooses not to be, then I think that that's something that should be granted, understood, and respected. It's not something that I think in any way should be contradicted or should be meutgar, challenged. Vice versa. I think it has its place, and just like it's a new notion of Ibn Ezra's Hamaskili Dom, which would be more appropriate for today, saying this class is going to deal with these questions, and a person should decide if he wants to address them. Let's go on to two more examples before I open here for questions, because I'm looking at the hour. So I want to go to source number 9, which is Ibn Abarbanel. And now we're already in the 16th century. And you see, Abarbanel was also very concerned with how these books were written. But he takes a different view, which we didn't discuss yet, which is why I want to move on to that one. Okay, are you with me? ואומנם אופן כתיבת, it's the top of the third page, ואומנם אופן כתיבת הספרים ההם, ואיך ידעו הנביאים העוברים בימים הראשונים אשר כתבו על הספר, אין ספק שמצאו הנביאים דברים נכתבו באותם הזמנים, בספרי דברי הימים שנזכרו בספר מלכים, והיו נכתבים אותם הדברים מאותו הזמן. אם על ידי השופטים או המלכים או שאר חסידי אותם הדורות והסופרים. So, this is Abarbanel's introduction to Nevi'im Rishonim. And what is he actually confronting? He's confronting two questions that a reader might have a problem with. One is, how did the Nevi'im know all the lists? For instance, if we start Divrei Yamim, if we start some other books, a list of genealogy. Abba ben, Abba ben, Abba ben. Like, did they hold a list? Did they remember it by heart? I know this Kehillah is good in remembering psukim by heart, but most of us aren't. And it's not always common to assume that the Navi held in his head details that were generations ago when he's starting from a latter point of view. And the second thing that's also that this also addresses in a roundabout way. He's not addressing it the same way, but it's the fact that some of the lists we find in parallel non-Jewish lists of kings of that time, of Assyrian kings, for example, that hold the same exact lists. And then basically what Abarbanel is saying, you should not accept Nevu'ah to be totally new, not based on any existing text. We could assume that the Nevi'im, mention things that we know from other kings from the ancient Near East, or that were written up from other kings in the ancient Near Eastern times. והיו נכתבים אותם הדברים מאותו הזמן. It could be very, very similar or parallel, או על ידי שופטים או מלכים, או שאר חסידי אותם הדורות והסופרים. There were writers for every nation. ומאשר היו מפוזרים ומפורדים מזה אחד ומזה אחד. והיו בהם דברים נכתבו כפי הרצון ולא כפי האמת, ומהם דברים מיותרים, כי זה דרך הסופרים ומגידי הדברים לשבח ולגנות יותר מהראוי. And all these lists of these other kings had their issues. Some of them emphasized certain successes of these kings. Some of them emphasized their faults. Some of them exaggerated when they were describing the wars these kings went to. But what's important to us? והיה אם כן מעורב בהם האמת עם השקר, so they had mixes of truth and lies. והמותר עם ההכרחי, and extra stuff with what's essential. לכן נחה רוח השם על הנביאים ההם, ויצבם לחבר ספר על כל הסופרים ההם בשלמות האמת. So God gave רוח הקודש to the נביאים, to take out from these books the relevant lists or reuse them, but in a very accurate, precise way, ויאספו אליהם כל הכתבים מהם, והודיעם האל יתברך בנבואתו, so God gave them nevuah to take out of these existing history books of other nations, lists or ideas, השלמת אותם הדברים ואמיתתם והצדקת והבדלת האמת מן השקר וההכרחי מן הבלתי הכרחי. Meaning, it could be the case, and we should not be surprised, if we go to the British Museum and we see that one of the kings there has a list of his achievements that are very parallel to what we see when we read about the, 8th century BCE kings, but it's all different. Because we shouldn't be surprised it's similar, because it's the same events in history, and it could even be that our Nevi'im used some of the same lists. Why is it different? Because those lists are exaggerations, have different agendas, and what does the Navi do? He doesn't invent the Nevuah from scratch. Sometimes what he does, says Abarbanel, is use the existing information, but beruach Hashem, and that's what's the nevuah part to his writings. In beruach Hashem, with the Spirit of God, benevuah, he rewrites these lists so they're accurate and they represent our Jewish history as it should be remembered. So now let's sum this up. I will say that you can look at all the sources from both sheets, and what you'll see, the common denominator is that you'll see that none of the questions that scholars raise today come out of the blue. Chazal knew more than the current scholars. Their understanding of what existed outside of the Jewish world is obvious. Their understanding of the fact that texts pass through generations, and don't imagine from 14th century the dfus that we have print. Imagine, like the Gemara says, Masechet Shabbat, Hananiah ben Garon sitting there with the lights, the Garbei Shemen, copying the texts. Imagine that copying the texts by human beings, by definition, even though it was very, very, very well kept, and it's one of the, to my mind, one of the miracles we have in our nation, how well these texts were kept. It's still done by human beings, and has been done that way for the past 2,500 years. That we have, the recorded texts, and we can assume so also that ever since Hashem gave the Torah to Moshe on Har Sinai, that the minute these texts passed to human beings, then keeping them already became our, I would say, project, our mission, and all we could do when we get a holy text is do our best we can to keep it, and I think the Jewish nation has done and something that no other nation succeeded to do. But we still can accept that on the margins, some of these questions are valid, and the sources we saw reflect the fact that these challenges were definitely dealt with throughout the generations. I opened with Rav Kook, so I'll end with Rav Kook. It's in the same book, Lenevuchei Ador. And I think what he says here is a very important answer for the people that sometimes feel like, wait a minute, if some of the verses, we're not sure if it's the Kriyo Vektiv, we're not sure why it's so parallel to other sources, was it corrected, etc. Maybe it's later than Moses' days, than Yemei Moshe. Rav Kook answers very nicely the makor of samchut, the basic of, help me again, samchut, authority. הבסיס האמיתי הוא תורה שבעל פה, שיסודה הוא קבלת האומה, שעל זה אין לפקפק כלל. על כן, אפילו תורה שבכתב נתקדשה בקדושת תורה שבעל פה, ואפילו ירבו דברי הבל ומחשבות תפל ככל הים לפקפק על זמן כתיבת התורה וסידור פרשותיה. אין זה מעכב אצלנו אפילו כמלוא נימה מאמונה שלמה, שתורתנו תורת אמת היא, וחיי עולם לנו עדי עד. Let's stop here for a second. Rav Kook actually points out that it doesn't matter how many people will attack the Torah shebichtav or its acceptance, because the way it was accepted. Because the reason we as a nation are connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu till today is first of all because the nation as a nation accepted in Torah Shebe'al Peh, the Kabbalah of the Ummah, the fact that we accepted this brit with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, that I'm already putting in my words, is what makes our relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, with Hashem, so holy, and something that's irreversible and can't be changed, and it can't be threatened. And therefore, even if people want to say that the Torah was written in different times, like he says, Al Zman Ktivat Torah, V'Sidur Parshotea, and maybe it had a different order, it doesn't change even one bit. En ze me'akev etzlenu afilu kemlo nima me'emuna shlema, our full-hearted faith, sheToratenu Torat emet hi v'chayei olam lanu adei ad. Why? Because the makor of our mechuyavut, kesher, I would say, brit with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, starts from the fact that we as a nation accepted the fact that Chazal, through Torah Shebe'al Peh, got the Torah Shebechtav, and it's what our nation as a whole takes upon themselves that is mechayev more than any other so-called objective information that one may find about the Torah. I'll read one more sentence. מפני שכך הכרנו כולנו בהכרה כללית וטבעית פנימית, מוסיף על העדות המסורה מאבותינו מצד גילוי השכינה, meaning the nation's will is what makes here the difference, וכך אנו חפצים לחיות ולחיות לעם להשם אלוקינו, ואנו מכירים שאין לנו שום קיום אחר בעולם כלל, כי אם להודיע שאנחנו חפצים לחיות דווקא בתורה, ועל כן אנחנו אוהבים אותה באהבת השם יתברך, ואוהבים את כל המעשים, הלימודים והדעות שמביאים לאהבה ולכבדה. And I think what this basically says, what Rav Kook is saying here, is that it's what we as a nation do and the way we respect the Torah. And here I want to actually conclude saying that I think it puts a big responsibility on every single one of us sitting in the room, because basically what Rav Kook is saying is that, well, the way the Torah will be well recognized and our relationship will be very strongly built on the Torah is not going to be by trying to prove in different ways which was the best version of a pasuk in the Kriya of the Ktiv, or when was it written. That's one aspect of learning Torah. But what's so important and makes our obligation to Torah so clear is the fact that we as a nation accepted this to be the essence of our relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And every time we go again about saying Birkot Torah and being part of this relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu and accepting God's will through the Torah Shebechtav and the Torah Shebe'al Peh, that's the essence of the authority of the Brit that we have with God. Shavua Tov.